Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping. I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Joining me on the show this week is none other than Matt Fanslow. Matt's been on the show plenty of times. He's got his own podcast, Diagnosing the Aftermarket from A to Z. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you do. He's got some great stuff on there. We'll talk a little bit about it in this episode, but I will include a link in the show notes if you want to check out his podcast as well. But he's here joining me on my show this week. We're going to talk a little bit more about electricity, some intermittent problems, testing fuel injectors, weird computer strategies, and more. Always great to talk to Matt. Really smart guy, and I appreciate his insight on a number of different topics. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the episode. Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field.
I'd rather just wing it.
Well,
and sometimes it's bad. But
I can say that I genuinely enjoy your show. If anybody on here hasn't listened to it, they definitely should. It's been awesome. And I guess I'll use that word again. I think what you're doing there is very genuine, right? Like you're not trying to BS anybody with anything. And so, that's a very refreshing thing to listen to. And I've enjoyed that quite a bit.
I'm not trying to BS anybody unless I think it's funny. Then yeah, it's going to get very deep really fast. But yeah, generally trying to just shoot straight as best I can. And, you know, even the stuff that sounds biased, I'm conscious of it, how it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just trying to level. You know, I talked to Lester with Dorman, and it sounds like I go pro Dorman. But I think I was just being very honest in that, yeah, I've run into issues with some Dorman products.
Mm-hmm.
I've also ran into problems with other products from many, many manufacturers. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, maybe that sounds like I'm trying to defend Dorman, but I think it's just being on the level. Lately, OE parts have not been all that reliable.
Yeah, I think it's parts in general right now.
Yeah,
You don't know what you're going to get. But yeah, well, so I'm not sponsored by Napa, so the Eklund line for a long time, that was my Dorman when I was the tech. I'm like, ooh, do we really want to get that mass airflow sensor? It's an Eklund. I don't know. And I mean, that's the thing is the aftermarket stuff when it comes to precision things. I just,
Yeah, some of it too, it sounds like might be partially the store's fault. Not like throwing them under the bus or anything. It's just not. I didn't learn it from Napa, having been sponsored by them at all. Actually, my interaction with them is very minimal. It's a friend of mine has a shop, owns it now. And his primary parts provider is a Napa store, and he found out that there are many levels of parts available to the Napa store. So depending on what they choose to stock determines maybe the quality level. I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And so he's kind of like, no, I don't want to mess with these, economy lines. I want to work with the more premium stuff. And the price is higher. I didn't ask.
But I suppose that goes with demographics and competition in a specific area and all that. What you're going to try to stock to hit your numbers. So,
because I think the Napa stores are not franchise stores, meaning they're not the people that own their store own their store. They maybe pay like franchise fees and stuff to get the logo and the paint schemes and advertisement stuff like that, but they own the store.
That's how it is around here.
Yeah. Where some other parts houses, parts stores, whatever, they're or they're corporate stores.
It's retail.
Whoever's working there
Yeah.
is an employee of the corporation.
Yep.
And so when they're selling whatever at a much lower price to you and you own your store, it's hard to sell a walk-in customer on spending twice as much money for this better part.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, and the general public is a totally different ball game than the shops, I imagine. But
yeah, and they're like, I got bills to pay. I can't just stock up on all this great stuff I can't sell.
Yeah, that whole parts shortage is it's definitely interesting out there right now for certain things. Those TCMs on the Fords. There's a gazillion of them on back order for the Focuses, and I don't know what happened this week. Because I think, I know that a number of them were used, but I don't know if like somebody was hoarding them and just released them in my area. But I did 8 of those in the last week. And it's not surprising because the failure rate on that transmission and the module are pretty high, but I hadn't done any in several months. And I think it was because nobody could find a module. And then all of a sudden I kept getting calls one after another, Focus, Fiesta, Focus. I'm like, what the heck? And so it was like half of what I did this week was just Focus TCMs. I don't know where they all came from, but somebody found a stash and started handing them out, I guess.
It's funny that you bring that up. So those of you listening, Sean and I have not talked about this until right now, but it's funny you brought this up because the Ford dealer towed over a Focus for me to program the TCM.
Okay.
They tried and failed. And this is their words. I don't know what they mean by it. I didn't ask where they got it. Nothing like that. They just said they put a Chinese TCM in this thing because they could not get the Ford or Motorcraft one.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what that means. They just got one off eBay and assumed. I don't know. But they couldn't program it. They said they couldn't communicate with it. And I don't know. I got it to go through. I fought with it a while.
Okay.
Really fought because it was, I don't know, blanks. I don't know if that's a really good term to use, but I'm going to go with it just because I kind of used Forescan to get the as-built data in.
Uh-huh.
Which I suppose I could have used IDS, but IDS was kind of ticking me off.
Trying to retrieve data from network.
Yeah, retrieve data, waiting a long time, fail.
Yeah.
And then I did that a couple times. And then I guess, I suppose I could have pumped it in manually anyways. But then it was kind of like, I never used Forescan. So I grabbed it, wrote it in, and then programmed it and went fine.
What I absolutely love about Forescan when you do that on the as-built is it shows you the coding, what's in there, right? You don't get to see that on Ford. Now you can look up Ford's website and you can get the VIN number and get the coding for your thing, but you don't know what's in that module. I really, really like that when I'm doing as-built stuff or wondering, hey, is this thing right for the vehicle? That is super, super handy. I heard you can get 1-year licenses again for that too, actually.
Okay. I think I lucked out and got the lifetime one.
I did. I got that before the whole thing with Russia happened. So
Yeah.
I'm really
$50 or $100. It was like a no-brainer.
It's an absolute no-brainer.
Keith Perkins has it, so if he has it, I have to have it.
Well, plus it's the most hilarious name for a scan tool
You gotta
ever.
be careful.
So.
Don't say it too fast, because either they'll mishear you or you'll mispronounce it.
Cool, man. Well, what else is going on in Fanslow's world? What's new?
Acting like I know what I'm doing. A lot of that. I would say, just programming. The keys stuff. The keys is just mind-boggling. I know I talk a lot about keys. It probably gets annoying. I annoy myself with it. It just blows my mind. That's just why I keep talking about it. My mind is so freaking blown by how much keys I'm dealing with. Selling, cutting, programming, all keys lost. So again, I think it might be unique to my demographic, my region, that there's really the 3 domestic dealerships. Anything else, it's almost an hour away to get any kind of support.
Do you have locksmiths running around down there?
There's 2 of them, but they really don't want to deal with cars.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, the one I have him do a lot of stuff for me because he's awesome. He loves to leashy stuff.
Okay.
So he'll leashy stuff for cheaper than I can buy the stupid leashy tool for. Which granted, I suppose if I bought one and used it a few times, but I don't do that much.
Uh-huh.
And it's cool. He shows up with his lawn chair, a big umbrella on it, and he's got his whatever he's drinking. I haven't checked what he's drinking, but and he just sits out there and he just has a ball, and it's awesome. Good.
Well, hey,
that's a good relationship to have. And then he sends everything car related down to me, and that I've gotten like 3 requests to do stuff residential. Can you duplicate this key? I suppose technically I could. I don't want to send it to him.
Sure.
So there's that, and then I've been testing out bench fuel injector flow testing and ultrasonic cleaning machines.
Okay.
And I kid you not, I thought fuel injector issues for the most part were over. There's always going to be some, or GDIs, they're going to get stuck open or they're going to clog.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to be like hard faults.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's bad all the time or it's good all the time.
I had a GDI today that was stuck wide open on a Cadillac.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of, I've had Volkswagens that way. You diagnose them with your nose.
Yeah, I literally did that. So I was like, boy, this thing really smells like gas.
Oh, and by the way, it doesn't hold pressure. But
yep.
I've had a rash of injector issues, both port and GDI. One of them on a Ford Fusion.
Okay.
It might have been a Focus, but I think it was a Fusion 4-cylinder. And I got a video of it. One injector, cylinder number 4, not that it matters, worked just fine at low speed, low frequency. Worked just fine at medium speed, medium frequency. You could hear it if you got your ear up really close, or if you listen to the video I got with headphones, you can hear the bad injector firing at a high frequency lightly. It does not sound like a good injector, but it flows very little or it just dribbles out. It was failing. And that's when the misfire would occur under not so much load, high RPM.
Okay.
As you're getting close to red line, this thing would miss. And it was really neat because you could kind of highway speeds, a lot of, air resistance. It's almost like I could control the amount of misfire.
Dang.
With my foot.
That's
it was cool. I could watch it on IDS or whatever. I think I had Top Done on there too. I wasn't trusting the Top Done. Turned out Top Done was just fine. The power balance, watching the histograph, it would drop down.
Sure.
I could kind of control how deep that valley would go with my foot.
Oh, nice.
But it was predicated more on the engine RPM than on the
load.
Actual load on the
Interesting.
engine.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it's just a cool failure.
Yeah, I can't think of one that's like that. Just not something with the internal spring or something, or the internals of that fuel injector not going back to where it's supposed to be when it's moving fast.
When I first saw it, I thought the machine sucked. Because they run at a higher voltage, and I got 4 of these going. I got them at the highest frequency, and this piece of crap machine just can't do it. But I found out that I could unplug all of them and just have the one going and bounce it down each injector. And it
Oh,
was
I see.
absolutely that injector.
Nice.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of work to pull injectors and to put them in a flow bench, but boy, you get an answer then when you do that. Does that work with, or maybe I should ask, is the one that you were working on, was that GDI?
Yes.
Okay, so it works with GDI injectors.
Yeah, so I want to be careful how this is phrased because I don't want it to be like, it's not false advertising or anything like that. They do say the machine itself says right on it, badging, owner's manual, user's manual, everything says it's appropriate for GDI.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only thing it really does is it has the voltage capability to run the injectors. That it'll do 70 volts, 40 volts, whatever is required to fire the injector because they're not 12 volts.
Right.
Pressure goes up. I mean, the highest I can get the machine to go is, I think, 120 PSI.
All right.
These things don't really, I mean, it's pretty rare that they're operating under that. You know, you have the situation where, the cars will run, right? If the high pressure pump's bad, like they'll idle. They might be able to maneuver around the parking lot and stuff, but they're just dogs. But not, God, I've been putting GDI injectors on there, and I've been finding stuff, flow issues, and then of course that was just mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's really cool.
But yeah, I've been using the crap out of that thing.
Nice.
And for a while, the main reason I was using it was I was going after the marine shops. Not Marines like Justin Morgan and Brandon Dills, like boats.
Sure.
And a lot of those motors, whether it's the big inboards, a lot of the outboards, the injectors are just like the same as out of a car, or smaller than a car.
I remember that when I was a young tech, and we'd get a inboard in, and it was a motor. I was like, oh, I know this 305 or this 350 or whatever. I can actually work on this knowledgeably. So
ATVs, same thing.
Okay.
So that was the stuff I was doing mostly because the boats and ATVs, for the most part, depending on the ATV and the owner, they sit all winter. So from late fall to early spring, which for us is like 9 months. Just kidding. It's more like, I don't know. They'll probably start yanking them
September.
Probably, yeah, late September, early October. They're going to start pulling boats out. And then they're going to get them back in the water maybe April-ish. May is probably a little more safe, depending on...
Depends on the year.
Yeah, the year and the weather. But so they're out of the water for quite a while, and they're just sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And they get clogged. They get really clogged.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do kind of the before and after with the flow rates, and throw them in the ultrasonic for a while. And most of the machines that have the ultrasonic tank, I don't like the ones that have the ultrasonic tank that is part of the machine, because now you can't dump the cleaning fluid out. It's like a big to-do.
Okay.
But some of them are like that, and it's whatever. They do the same thing. But you got the ultrasonic tank in proximity of the machine, and then there's usually a protocol or a sequence that is for cleaning, that while they're in the ultrasonic tank, specifically the tips are in the cleaner, it's going to pulse the injectors. And it might pulse them all the time and vary the frequency, or it might just pulse them once in a while. Like it's cleaning for 5 minutes, and then it'll start pulsing them for a minute or 30 seconds or something like that. The really good machines, the really expensive, like ASNU, maybe Carbon Zap, they cycle them all the time, and they'll kind of back flush the injectors. So the you got the pintle, the tip in the cleaning solution.
Yeah.
And it's cycling them the whole time. It actually starts pumping it with the pintle, starts pumping the fluid up through the injector and out the inlet screen, or where the inlet screen would be. So the injector inlet, and you'll watch, not all the time, but a lot of the time, just the grossest junk coming out of these injectors.
Huh. That's crazy. That'd be cool to see. I've never used one of those machines. I've seen videos and pictures and stuff, but I've never actually had a chance to mess around with one. So it's just, I'll get some new injectors for it. Yeah, that's cool. I'm trying to think of the last one I've had that had restricted injectors. What I've been running into a lot lately, I think I had a podcast episode on it, was a LS motor that had the wrong injectors. And I've seen that, I think, 3 times since. It's been a cakewalk since my first time around, because I actually found a chart of all the GM truck V8 motors and all the injector part numbers and the flow rates to them. Oh, so I have it saved in a document. And so if I get one of these things that's running rich or lean all the time, I'll check for E85, but then I ask them, hey, was there any work done? Did anybody swap anything? And yeah, 3 times. Yeah, they did injectors at some point, and they're the wrong injector. And you can check the flow rate based on the motor and what it's supposed to have. And it's okay. Yeah, just get the injectors. But, that's been handy. I should actually, I'll put that link in the show notes for anybody that wants that, because that's a handy document to have.
Yeah. The only wrong injector ones I have are usually, they've been Hondas.
Okay.
Like the Honda Fit.
Sure.
And they put in aftermarket injectors on, and they tried to do I don't know if cross-platform is quite the right word, but they're trying to get the one injector part number to serve multiple applications. And it turns out that these do not flow enough. So they constantly run lean, and it ends up it was the wrong injector.
Yeah.
That I found on the machine. I had an inkling of it, and I remember talking to Thornton about it a little bit too, and he's kind of like, you might have to throw some injectors at this thing. So I put them on the flow bench, and then I got one new injector to compare. And it was like 20% difference.
Oh, wow.
The OE injector flowed at least 20% more. And so then we got 4 injectors, threw it on there and fixed it. But it kind of knocked me around a little bit.
Oh, yeah. The first time that I went through it, it definitely fought me for a little while. And I was looking at, fuel quality and mass airflow and all those other things. Because the injectors that had been put on that one were used. So it wasn't like they were brand new. They look like, and they bolt up, like they fit, they plug in, all that stuff. But they had been swapped over from another vehicle, from another engine they had sitting around. Well, they fit, they must work, right? I guess not. And if you look at this, this document where they have all these injectors, there must be, 20 different styles of injectors depending on the RPO code for the V8 motor that you have for these trucks. So you really got to pay attention. Just because they fit doesn't mean that they work. But yeah, I was at a shop the other day, and this definitely related to, I think, the topic or the area that we wanted to tackle with this conversation. It was a shop owner, but he's like shop owner tech, which I see a lot of, where the guy owns the shop, but he's also back trying to figure out the cars and stuff. And it's usually not a great recipe. But he is working on I believe it's an 11 Jeep Commander or something. It's a Jeep with a V6 motor and has some O2 sensor codes, right? That's the part that matters. And He was telling me, it's reading 5 volts on the signal wire for the O2 sensor. So I'm thinking open circuit right away, or my heater's not working or whatever. But then he was telling me that, because the reason he was talking to me is because he wanted to replace the PCM. He's like, I'm pretty confident it's PCM. I'm like, okay. And I wasn't even arguing with him. Like, okay, you want me to program it? Cool, whatever. But he was just talking. He wanted to explain how he had come to that conclusion. And he was telling me that he has a power probe, and I've never actually owned a power probe. I've used one a few times. I've never felt the need for one, although I definitely see how they could be handy. I've just never had one, but he's got what I think is one of the newer ones. So if you know more about him, you can tell me. But apparently this new one, or this one he has, you can put and I say signal because I don't exactly know what it is. You can put a signal onto a circuit, right? So you can tie into a circuit, and then there is a wand of some sort that you can follow up the harness, and it responds.
I think I've heard about this.
Yeah, there's another tool out there that does this. It's like the something fault finder, where you track this wand across the harness that the wire would go into, and it beeps, or it gives you a visual alert that, hey, this circuit is intact because I keep following it. And then when it stops, either you've gone the wrong direction or there's an open there. Okay. So he's explaining this. I'm like, oh, okay. And so he followed 3 of the wires up to the PCM, and they were all good. And then he followed the other one to the fuse box for the power for the heater. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. And I just thought it was very interesting, the approach that he took to confirm that the circuits were intact on this vehicle, or any vehicle, really. And I was just thinking, I was like, boy, I would have taken a very, very different approach. Maybe it's because I don't understand how that tool works, because I don't know what it's doing to make that happen. But also just because I do understand how the sensor works, and I'm going to treat that circuit a little bit different. I'm going to assess it in a very, very different way before I call a computer. And he might be right. I don't know. I haven't actually programmed it for him yet, but I was just thinking about that. I'm like, boy, everybody's got kind of their own approach and thought process when they're doing electrical testing and assessing circuits. Can this circuit do what it's supposed to do? And there's almost endless, well, not endless, but there's a lot of different options that you can take. There's a lot of different methods that you can apply to say, yes, this is good or this is bad. And I don't know. I thought that would be an interesting thing to discuss.
Yeah, I think what's most important is to really grasp what is the tool capable of telling you, and what is it incapable of telling you. Maybe I just worded that in an overly complex way, but you have to understand how that tool really works. And I'm not talking like, oh, okay, the scope, it's got a ADC, and it's, the front end is voltage is coming in on the front end and all that. I don't mean that. But if we're talking about a test light, it's going to load the circuit. How much? You should probably know. Mm-hmm. You should probably take your current probe or your meter and measure how much current it draws. How much does it draw initially, cold, and then after it sits there for 5 minutes, what is it drawing? Does it start out drawing, a quarter amp, 250 milliamps, and then after a while it drops down to 100 milliamps? Mm-hmm. That would be important to know, just to know. That headlight, does it pull 6 amps initially, 8 amps, 10 amps, 12 amps initially, and then you let it burn for a while, and then does it drop significantly? Most stuff does. Mm-hmm. And what does it drop to? So if that's on that circuit for 15 minutes while you're trying to find some short, how much current is potentially flowing through there? And is it, maybe not a good idea to have that as the tool of choice In this situation, you should be going and get your, 3157 or 56 or whatever your favorite bulb is that draws a little bit less current. And then, the voltmeters. Most of them they don't load a circuit at all, or, very minusculely. And understand what that means for the problem you're trying to test. If you're trying to verify power feed and ground to something that, draws 12 amps, if that device, and we'll just say it's an electric motor, for whatever reason, we're going to call it an electric motor, it should normally they draw around 12 amps. And you figure that either because from experience, or it's fused for 20 amps, so it's going to be around 10, most likely. Okay. If that device is open circuited, if you're checking power feed and ground to it with your voltmeter, it's not telling you exactly what you think it is anymore, because it is now an unloaded circuit. It's open circuit voltage. You can command it on all you want. There's no load. It's not stressing anything out. And sure, if the motor's open, it's bad. Fine. I'll agree to that. It's bad. But did it go bad on its own? Or is it bad ground causing it to spin slower and it cooked the brushes? I'm totally making this up as I go, but I know that happens.
Sure.
You can't stress the ground. So now you're putting in this component, and whatever it is, this electric motor, you bolt it in, and then it works. Does it get shipped? Or now you're going to load test it. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm only getting 9 volts.
Yeah.
Cook the, relay contacts or whatever. Well, okay. I know it's unloaded. The circuit I should test this under conditions similar to what it's going to be operating at. I've got a headlight that draws 8 amps. I will add, in parallel, this other bulb that draws, 2, 3, 4 amps. And I'm going to really, stress this thing out.
Right.
Or I'm going to take my power probe and I'm going to use the circuit breaker function, which is, I think, good for 20, well, depending on which one you have. I think it's like 20 amps. Mind you, you're going to have to hit it a few times because you want to flow current for a while. So it's probably better off using the bulbs or something, some device that will load that circuit. And if it is, if it's supposed to be 12 and you can only get 10, if it can flow 10 at, 12.5 volts or 13 volts or whatever your battery maintainer set at, it's probably fine. But I think that understanding, knowing that my scope, my meter is not loading the circuit, and if the load of the circuit is compromised in a high resistance fashion, the circuit's no longer loaded. My voltage test doesn't mean what I think it does. So what if it's 13 volts there? It's unloaded.
Yep. I do that. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, that component is bad. We're going to replace it. But now we can do one more test to verify, or a couple tests, I suppose, if you want to be really itemized, that we are getting the proper amount of feed voltage and a solid ground.
Well, that's a great point to bring up, is you can do multiple tests, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You can use a meter and a test light and a headlight bulb and an amp clamp, and there's nothing wrong with that. It might take you a little bit more time, but why not? You got 3 things that say the thing you think it is. You're in good shape with that, right? So nothing wrong with that. But
yeah, and I think to build on what you just said, you stick the bulb in there and it glows brightly. Is it glowing brightly at 10 volts, or is it glowing brightly at 12 volts, or is it, and if it ends up it's not as bright as it could be, what is it? You're going to still have your meter or scope there to check what is the voltage under load. What is the, I guess, ones could be the voltage on the feed or the ground. We're going to check the voltage drop.
Right.
And so that it becomes a very powerful test.
Um, eh, Going back to what you initially said is understanding the limitations and the capability of your testing equipment is huge, right? And people will, downplay a test or bash a tool for whatever reason, right? I don't use this tool because blah, 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 and it's treated as this is a bad testing method or this is a bad tool. And I don't think there's a whole lot of those. I'm sure there's some. There's some things where I'm not going to use it in this position, right? But it's all about understanding what it can and can't do.
Yep.
And the real simple way is, a hammer is not great for doing electrical work, but it doesn't mean it's a bad tool. You just got to know how to use it. And same thing with electrical. A voltmeter is a fantastic tool, but you have to know how to use it. I've mentioned on the podcast before, but I do it, with the students when we're doing this stuff is I have a jump pack, I have a voltmeter, and I'm basically measuring voltage across my body. I've got the meter hooked up to the ground side of the box. I'm holding the red clamp. I'm holding the red lead. They're not touching each other, but the meter's measuring 12 volts through my body. And I'm like, am I going to light up this light bulb? And we even try it. Of course, it's not going to too high a resistance, but just to show you like, hey, 12 volts this way, this open circuit measuring, this ain't going to get you anywhere. But that's the key, is knowing that, right? And that's where the work beforehand comes in, is understanding what my tool can do, what it can't do. But here's the other thing that's really, really important to understand, and maybe even easier than the tooling, but understand what the circuit's purpose is, right? Yep. I want to know, I try to divide it up in two sections. When I'm approaching a circuit, I want to know what it does, and there's an endless variety of what circuits do for a car, but is it doing work or is it sending information, right?
Yep. That's really it, right? Those are the two big sides of the coin, And
I'm going to treat them differently and use different testing methods depending on, which one. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to pull out a test light for, a data line, right? I might get to the point where I'm suspecting it's shorted to ground. Well, test light's a great tool to tell you if it's shorted to ground, right? But it'll probably lead me in that direction. But I start off with, okay, what's this circuit's purpose? If it's doing work, we need to use some different testing methods, and we need to make sure the circuit can do work. If it's sending info, okay, different set. That's going to be scope and maybe more meter and things like that. And that's the approach that I try to take when I'm jumping into something to look at it.
Yeah. Even like data lines, if I have one that, I feel like it's getting pulled down by a module. So you just, whatever module is plugged in, data line goes low, unplug it, comes back up. Sometimes it's easy to just order the module up, plug it in, and hope for the best. And so sometimes I will go get like my high impedance test light or something, and I will scope that data line while loading it a little bit, because is it capable of flowing a tiny bit of current, tiny bit?
Sure.
But how much does this affect it?
Sure.
Because I'm starting to wonder, if I have some very light load, little more than a meter. I don't know. A scope probably doesn't load it quite enough either, but that would be a little bit better than a meter, because typically meters are 10 million internal. We'll just say internal resistance, but technically it's impedance. Scopes usually are, depending on what ones, you have to look them all up because they're all different. Some are like 100 k ohm. 100,000. Some of them are 1 meg. You got to look it up. But that would, either case, they offer a little more load to the circuit than the meter. And then if you can add, if that isn't quite enough to do what you need, then you can turn to something else. Sometimes a high impedance test light is perfect. Sometimes it's even still too much load. But it's something to just verify, like, okay, this system is capable of generating the current. This module is just dumping it to ground. Whereas you start testing, sometimes you realize like, well, no, I'm going to get this module, plug it in. And I could anyways, like I don't trust my test. Plug in the new module, does the same freaking thing. It's like, oh, now I got to figure out how is where does this network get its, energy from, power from? And to be able to deliver that, I might have accidentally, made a bad call based off, an unloaded test.
That's interesting. I haven't run into a situation like that. So it's by removing the module, you're taking a stress off that network, and it's able to come back, and the rest of it talk.
The vast majority of the time, it's the modules just dumping it to ground. The vast majority of the time, it's just the two times that jump right out at me. It's where like, I put that module in there, and oh no, that didn't fix it.
Is that like
a different
module? Like I'm thinking like GM single wire communication, where a single or one of or two modules will provide the bias on the network.
Two or even one.
Okay, there's just one master module putting it out there.
A lot of times the body control module.
Got it. All right.
And for whatever reason, and these are the two cases I had, and unplugging other modules didn't seem to have the same effect. And maybe a flaw in the test at the time was unplug it, wasn't affected, plugged it back in, where it would have been interesting to unplug and leave them unplugged as I go. And then if I have this whole, and timing and which module it is and where you started and ended up probably factor in, I finally get to this last module and unplug it, maybe going around and plugging everything else back in and seeing if it comes back up. And then if that's not the case, jacking around with that. But, I just found that it's like, hey, just a quick test, see what happens. And I'm not saying it stays rock solid at whatever voltage, 7 volts. It pulls it down a little ways. But I know when I plug that module in, it dumps it to ground. So if I put a small load on there, it's not powering up no test light, not a incandescent style, but just like a high impedance test light. If it'll power that up, that's a little bit of a load. It's just another, checkbox that it's capable of delivering some current. Most likely this module has failed. I don't know. There's very few things I'll ever say that are like just hard and true, but
right.
And that's definitely not one of them.
Especially when it comes to networks.
And it could have been just bad luck with the other two. But it's just that one quick extra test that gives me a little more confidence. There isn't much confidence to begin with, so a little bit more to just say like, I'm reasonably sure this module is bad.
That's the thing is, like I mentioned, having multiple tools that you understand how they work, and then you can test things multiple ways. Why not? Why not do that? And give yourself that much more confidence to call a specific part or whatever, get you to where you need to go.
And kind of picking on the power probe, for some of us is the best thing ever. I mean, I love that thing. I can, whatever, depending on what I'm testing, but I have power and ground right there in my hand.
Yeah, that is handy.
If I'm messing around with, window motors, depending on, those have changed significantly now too, depending on the car.
Yeah.
But you could be there and just, now I got power feed and ground right. I got power and ground right there. Boom. I can just force it whichever way I want. Or, I got this ground. It should be able to handle a quick 20 amps. And I'll put power on that ground just to see if it'll pop the breaker.
Okay.
Something like that. If I got a module that doesn't communicate and a bad ground, and it's just like, okay, and just quick hit ground on there, and now I can talk to it. Okay, I got to just trace this down. This will be done deal. Or I sell them a power probe and I tape it ground and then ship the car.
I use the real, the retractable
I love those things.
leads.
I
Yeah.
love those things.
A lot of times, like it's the same thing you're mentioning is to have power ground where like underneath where everything's rusty or in the car and everything's plastic.
Yep.
I love having battery ground and power
that's
there.
That's a key. I don't think that could be stressed enough is get to the battery.
Mm-hmm.
And with those reels or the power probe, not to make this a power probe commercial, but either case, you have battery power, battery ground right there. I love those. They're what, two wire 30-foot leads, magnetic.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I have 3-4 of them.
Yeah, they're fantastic. Just don't send a whole lot of current through them. They'll melt.
Yeah. It's interesting if you read them. And I rarely read anything, but I don't know why I read this one. I thought it was funny. When it's coiled up, the maximum they say is 6 amps.
Okay.
They should say like 6 amps for no more than 10 minutes or something, but they say 6 amps. If it's completely uncoiled, you can go up to 10 amps.
Okay.
Which I just think that's funny. Because I'm guessing that if you're flowing much more than 6 amps without reeled up, you're going to have yourself a little bit of a hot plate. You could probably cook lunch on it while you're...
I gotcha.
One of those rainy days, you could be warming up some Campbell's soup on it.
Yeah. That's something you learn real quick is, it's one way to figure it out that, current's going to make heat. And you realize, oh, this amount of amperage will melt my test leads or melt plastic or melt my... if you have the wrong bulb in your test light, melt the plastic on the inside of your test light.
Well, that's a good point because it's been a while since I've had one, but when there's kind of a dead short to ground on a circuit, I like to put power to it. So I don't know, whatever. It's a shorted courtesy light wire. And, it's fused for 10 amps, but I'm not going to put 10 amps on it. I'm going to put 2 or 3 amps on it.
Uh-huh.
But if I let that car sit in the shop for a few hours or overnight, and I come in and I hook that light up, so, because I'm using the light to buffer or regulate the current on that wire, and it's going to glow nice and bright because it's a dead short. And I just let it sit, walk away from it for 10, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Go find the boss and bring up something about hockey, and that'll kill 45 minutes. Then I go get my infrared camera, thermal imager, and start looking around, and it's pretty amazing. You might have to pull some panels here and there depending on where the wires go, but a lot of times, even with the panels on, you can get a kind of a hint where it's shorted because there'll be some heat. Because everything else, you have thermal equilibrium.
Yeah.
We're bringing out the big terms. But everything's about the same temperature until you hook up that light and flow some current through that wire. Now it's building heat.
Okay.
And you can... It's remarkable.
That's a badass tip. Yeah.
It gets me in the ballpark. Like I know, okay, I want to look in the B pillar here, and I pull the panels, and it may end up like right there, or now with the wires exposed, I can go. Oh no, it keeps going. Oh, it's going under the carpet here. Peel the carpet back, and then, we need to put this on a hoist, and then. Oh, somebody must not have liked their exhaust shield rattle anymore, so they ran some big sheet metal screws up through the bottom. And, you know what I mean? And it's like...
Yeah. That's a fantastic tip. And then especially if it's, wintertime.
Yes.
Around here, just leave it sit outside for a little while, and boy, you're going to find that quick.
Yeah, anybody wants to bash winters, just... you have... Yeah, you got a short or sometimes parasitic drains.
Yeah, depending on the amperage.
Outside in 0 degrees and go out there with a thermal imager.
It's gonna pop up. It's gonna be very, very obvious.
There's some contrast. Everything's blue except that.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I'm trying to actually think. I get a few calls for short to grounds, but usually the ones I get called on are intermittents.
Oh yeah.
Those are the ones they want me to come look at, and I try to avoid intermittents as much as possible. But those are. I mean, you got to assess the circuit and see how big it is. If there's only a few things on it, okay, it's visual. Let's see if we can find it. But like you say, if it's a interior lighting circuit, like I don't know what you could be there all day trying to find that if it's not popping all the time.
Yeah, I have 2 cars. One's a Chevy pickup and one's a Ford pickup. Wildly intermittent parasitic drains, and I'm not even sure what they want me to do. I don't even know. They'll leave the car with me for a month, and I'll throw the Vantage Pro on there, and or whatever I got to do, anything, Pico with a current probe, and it'll sit for a week and never break 30 milliamps.
Wow.
And I'll drive them, and I'll make everybody take them for lunch to go drive them and turn every accessory on and off. And I mean, the ones we had for a month, I don't think it ever broke 30 milliamps. And then he took it home. I think it was good for a month or two, and then one morning went out and it was dead. Yeah, doesn't your machine tell you where the problem is?
You just plug in the computer.
If I had that machine, I wouldn't even have to work anymore.
Yeah, let me know when you find that one. Who makes it? Yeah, I've been just avoiding the intermittent stuff altogether because it is just not time conducive if we can't duplicate the problem. And more and more that I'm doing this, like I want to guarantee my answer, right? As a tech, maybe I'd be okay throwing a part at it. Now what I'm doing, what I'm charging, I don't want to throw a part at anything. Like I want to have proof. I want to have conclusive tests. And you always get to that point where it's like, well, is it this or this? But, I tell people like, I can't charge you my rate and guess at a part. And that's what we'd be doing. And so I've almost all but eliminated them. The way that they slip through is if the shop is, maybe not sure themselves or just not descript in what's happening. And then I end up getting, tossed into one where it's not acting up or whatever. But it is so tough when when I got a whole day schedule, I got to drive to this place and this place and this place. And then, I'm hearing this car isn't acting up. I'm like, oh man, this sucks.
It's almost blasphemous. But there are times, depending on the component, where it's almost cheaper to just replace it than the test. Yeah.
In that situation, I agree.
And a brick and mortar might have a little bit easier time with that. It's one of those things where there's almost a hypocrisy amongst shop owners, shop management, where they'll, in this conversation, complain about trying to get paid diagnostic time from the client. They don't appreciate, what it takes to diagnose these vehicles or, work on the vehicles. And then they'll hire somebody, mobile or another shop or whatever, a tech, to come in at night to, inspect, analyze, diagnose some system. And then they don't really necessarily want to pay either. So you got this bit of a hypocrisy.
Yep.
But in certain cases, like if you suggested such a thing, whatever this, I don't know, pick up component, I don't know.
Sure.
That very reasonably could be the issue. Like statistically, even the probabilities are really high that this is the issue. And it costs, the part is your cost, their cost, $50, $100. and they can have it installed in 15 minutes. How much time can you spend testing? Like, you could check power feed, ground, all that pretty easy, signal, whatever, but to really like dynamically test it. If it took you an hour legitimately, and I'm not saying like dragging your feet, like, let's just, for the sake of discussion, legitimately would take an hour. That's probably more than the cost of the part, and to put it in and to know. I'm not saying it happens every day. Like, I say it every day, so I don't have to test anything. But no, there are times where it's just like, I don't think I can test this for what it will cost to just slam the part in there and see, and you end up being right a lot. And
yeah, your gut feeling on a lot of stuff ends up being correct. Definitely not always, but a lot of the time, once you've done this for a while, you learn to trust it. For me, it's usually like my gut feeling is telling me it's not that part. That's when I like really got to listen, because I'm almost 100% right in that case.
I mean, it's a probabilities game, and you're not, I'm not suggesting to do it out of laziness. That would be way the wrong reason. It's 99% of the time my reason, but it shouldn't be the reason. The reason should be logical. Like, the probability of this being the issue is quite high. But to test and prove this may take
outweighs the cost of the part. Yeah,
right.
That makes a lot of sense.
There I sit, like, what do you want to do? And not so much to the client, but service advisor, or in your case, to the shop manager or service advisor, or whoever you end up dealing with, shop foreman. And I just don't feel like they should look at you cross-eyed with that. They should be like, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, okay. Let me check. Yeah, you're right. Our cost is like $50. If we're wrong, we'll eat $50. Boom. And and I get it, labor. But
yeah, all depends on what part we're talking about. I guess,
I'm not saying slamming freaking phasers and chains and guides,
Yeah.
Unless it's like a Chevy or a Ford or a Mini or a BMW or. Wait a minute, I gotta restate this. Almost every time, slam chains and guides and phasers, but only after you do an oil flush. Always do that first.
Well, speaking of phasers and stuff, and I don't know if we're going off topic. It doesn't really matter. It's my show. I can do what I want. That phaser solenoid in that Malibu that I called you about a few weeks ago. I did an episode on it because I thought it was pretty interesting. That car's been fixed. I haven't heard anything back, and I've been waiting every day to get the call, like, "Oh, it's doing it again," or whatever.
You should have jinxed timing it when you recorded that podcast.
That's what I figured. I was like, this guy is going to call back with timing codes or, same symptoms tomorrow, and I haven't heard anything. And I've been to that shop, so sometimes I wonder when I don't hear from a particular vehicle, like, and I don't have the 100% confidence. I'm like, did that come back? And they were just pissed. They didn't call me, but I'm sure almost always I'll hear about it if it does. But anyways, haven't heard anything about this car. And so that was just, I've had some people post some stuff in the Facebook group, very, I think, probably accurate, very in-depth, like, descriptions of how this is causing the problem that I had. But man, it still kind of racks my brain on exactly the symptoms I had with a solenoid causing that, especially unplugged. Like, I don't know. I'd really have to take something apart to really understand how that one's working out.
Yeah, I know the one time we were talking, it might have been strategy.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. There's two questions: is why only during auto stop start does it act funny. And that might be the easier question. It might just be a strategy that they don't list, right? And they're doing something with air fuel delivery. PJ Walter told me that in Toyotas, the ECM memorizes the cam crank as the engine comes to a stop, and it uses that on restart, but it does not do that on a key cycle. Yep. And that might be a similar strategy at GM. I'm like, well, that makes a whole lot of sense if that's what's going on and we have a timing issue here. Yep. And then somebody else said something with the solenoid and some oil pressure, but
not out of favoritism, but PJ's, that would be a strategy that's kind of a known strategy that could cause it. The other thing is kind of like, I don't know, it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn. It's really not my goal.
Toot away.
No, but it's been brought up before. Is a lot of times when they're writing the software or program or whatever for any given system or sequence of events, they don't necessarily account for everything. So everything's written so that everything works within certain parameters. And when it falls outside of that, now you're into something usually considered like failure mode effects management, or outside of a parameter. And how it reacts is, it depends on, did they account for it?
Which in a lot of the cases is no.
No, I don't, we don't know. I don't know how much time they have to do this. How much of it are they doing? How much of it's, not trying to say like the machines are taking over the world, but how much of it is machine learning? How much of it is AI? Has that really reached automotive yet? I don't know. I think some cases, maybe special cases, it's heavily involved. Other cases, not at all. But if they don't account for certain things, the behavior of the car is wildly illogical. Because it just goes crazy, right? Because the calculator or the counting box, right? The control module is a counter, just counts stuff. It goes squirrely if it doesn't know what to do. And you get the weirdest stuff, and the one that usually pops in my head is Hyundais with single cylinder misfires with cam timing off. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And I find that the most reasonable answer is they've never really accounted for any of that failure outside of whatever parameter that is. If they expect cam and crank correlation to be within 5 degrees when it goes outside of that, and they don't have anything set up until maybe a DTC sets, but the DTC doesn't set till later, it doesn't miscounts. It doesn't know what to do anymore. I'm not saying a computer just says F it, but it just does what it can with what it has.
Yeah. It's only got so much ability to adapt based on the programming it was given. Right. And then, yeah. Well, that's the thing, is if you're engineering this thing, it'd almost be impossible to conceive all the possible ways that an engine can fail or a control system can fail or whatever it is. And there's invariably going to be one that you didn't foresee and you didn't put that into the programming and it can't adapt to, and then who knows what it's going to do, what interesting thing that's going to happen. And I think that's, a lot of the weird stuff that we see. I'm trying to think of one, because I know that I've experienced this multiple times on different cars, and I'm kind of drawing a blank on a good example right now, but it happens on vehicles where they have some very weird symptoms based on what's wrong, but that's just how everything kind of worked out, and it wasn't accounted for, it wasn't planned for, and that's what we've got to deal with.
Yeah, now you got me thinking, but that was the one that usually pops in my head because it seems so out there.
That's a good example. Yeah, you don't see that very often. I mean, even outside of computer stuff, we see this with cars, like a single cylinder misfire from contaminated fuel. I ran into that. That's freaking weird. Like, that's super, super weird. But it just happened to be like the way the rail's set up on that particular vehicle. It gets a single cylinder misfire from contaminated fuel. And they didn't conceive that when they designed it. Like, they didn't think that was going to happen, but it does. That's a thing that you can run into. Yeah,
you could depend. That kind of almost makes sense when you start thinking about it, because if you dump the fuel into some beaker or whatever and let it sit and it separates, depending on what it's contaminated with, the gasoline sits on top. If it's contaminated with water, gasoline will be on top. And if the rail itself, well, I'm not saying the rail's bent in any such a way, but the way the rail sits is there's a high point and a low point. Gasoline's going to the higher side. The water will go to the low side. And assuming, you usually see this on returnless fuel systems, which almost everything is now. So when you had a return style system, this wasn't an issue.
Kind of suck it out of there, yeah.
Right. But with these, sits for a while, separates. Now that one injector is basically getting all the contaminated or the water or the whatever. Yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, well, once you figure it out, sometimes it does make sense, but leading up to it, like, you don't make that connection. Or at least I definitely didn't when I went through that one.
It's never happened to me, but I've seen case studies on older, I would say primarily like the Dodge line of V8s, and I guess the V6. So we're talking, I don't know if the 4.7s were involved, but maybe 5.2, 5.9 V8s, 3.9 V6, I think. Returnless fuel systems. And the fuel pump was designed in such a way so that the electric fuel pump sat inside of a kind of like a cup.
Okay.
That also, so there's a sock on the bottom of the fuel pump, the electric motor portion. And that sat inside of basically a cup that also had a fuel sock on it. And when the fuel level was above, a quarter tank or so, the fuel could run over the top of the lips of the cup and keep the cup full, and that's the fuel pump would pull it out of that cup and pump it up the rail. But the fuel level would drop below that. The only way for the fuel to get into the cup was through the sock. If the sock became contaminated, fuel couldn't get into the cup. So you get something called fuel pump cavitation, which means it was just pumping air, fuel and air. And the rails sat in such a way that the front cylinders, so we're talking Chrysler would be 1 and 2, that 1 and 2 would start misfiring. Start up the car would be fine, and then after a little bit, a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 would start misfiring, 2 would start misfiring. And maybe if it ran long enough, 3 and 4 would start misfiring a little bit. Because this thing is pumping air, and because the rail was tipped a little bit, where the 1 and 2 were higher than 7 and 8, or 5 and 6, they would be pumping, or the injectors would be trying to inject an air fuel mixture. Instead of just the fuel.
Yeah, right.
I never got to see that live. The ones I got would just run okay and then just go to hell in a handbasket and misfire, period.
That's interesting.
And the diagnostic test from that was either my favorite was just a nice clear fuel grade tube hose, and disconnect the fuel line at the rail, connect the hose to the line from the tank, and route it back into the fuel tank, jump the fuel pump relay, and wait. And in short order, all of a sudden you'd see they're just filled with air bubbles.
Yeah, all those trucks for me, they were just all extended cranks. I guess I got lucky. Like those fuel pumps just never held, or the regulator in the tank would just puke fuel pressure. That was what I remember from those ones. But boy, yeah, some crazy problems that can come from the complex systems that are built into these vehicles. You just don't know what's going to happen, and something like that, man, it's got to take either a very smart person or a lot of effort to sort through something like that to get to the solution and figure out what's wrong.
Yep.
Usually for me on something like that, it's effort. It's okay. All right, I've replaced every single part. What's left?
Yep. Any successes I have like that, it's usually attributed to pure dumb luck.
There's only so many parts on the car.
Yep. And it needed it anyways. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the thing took out the other thing. That's why we're replacing both of those. So
I usually tell people that's a good, or clients, like generally that's a good way to determine if you're kind of getting jerked around.
Yeah.
If they give you the daisy chain thing.
I had a 16 Ram today that they call me to program the rack. Well, number one, you don't have to program the racks on those. It's a key up thing on that particular model. And I didn't look before I went. They just called me like, hey, can you program this? Okay. So I came up, didn't need to be programmed, but I'll go through, I'll do the steering angle thing and make sure everything's good. Well, I started up, and so I turn the wheel like a quarter turn, binds up, and then it's free, and then it binds up another quarter turn later. I'm like, I look over to the guy. I was like, what was the problem with this one? It was binding. And they replaced this rack they waited like 2 weeks for. And I mean, I knew exactly what was wrong because I worked as a tech for a long time. And, there's a little U-joint in the steering shaft. And I look down, it's all rusty. I had the guy turn it. I'm like, yeah, I think that's your problem. He was like, I could tell like the look on his face immediately was like, oh shit. And, then he starts backpedaling to me like I'm the customer. He's like, well, we had these codes in there and maybe this, took out the rack. And, I was like, whatever, dude, it ain't my thing. I'm glad I don't work here, that I don't have to deal with the customer side of things. But that's the sort of stuff that you hear, right? It's the backpedaling, because this was a to-do to get this rack in this vehicle, not only the labor, but just getting the part and the cost of it and everything. And, it's got the same problem. That does happen a lot. And it's from what I see, it's rarely, malicious. It's usually almost always incompetence.
Yeah, and sometimes when we say incompetence, it comes off extremely condescending.
Yeah, arrogant. Yes, definitely.
You incompetent fool.
Right,
and
right.
Incompetence really doesn't mean that. Like, there is probably... there's no probably. There is a lot of stuff I do that I am fairly incompetent. When it really comes down to brass tacks, fairly incompetent. I get away with a lot.
Same here.
And, to say you're fully competent in something, that would be pretty darn arrogant. Not that it doesn't exist, but it's probably narrow subjects or not fields, but maybe fields to a degree. But anyways, the incompetence thing, it's something you're always going to be working with. And to say that somebody's incompetent just means they weren't fully competent. And it doesn't mean like lack of mental facilities. It could be knowledge, a theory,
experience,
wisdom gained from experience. So this goes back ways. When you're saying that, it reminded me a little bit of one a shop I worked at a long time ago. The Dodge Ram pickup, it would have probably been in the truck was probably in late 80s, early 90s. Dodge Ram. And the complaint was very hard to steer. And another shop had put a new power steering pump in it, new steering gear. And one of our other techs was looking at it, and he was getting ready to pull the trigger on another power steering pump. It's just not getting any assist. And we might have put it on there. He might have put it on there. Because this also had, I think, had the solenoid in the power steering pump to help regulate pressure.
Sure.
So whatever they called that, like EPSS or something like that. It, of course, didn't fix it. So, of course, they sick me on it. And I'm like, power steering? I don't know anything about power steering. Oh, it's got a solenoid on it. You're going to have to test that. I'm thinking that's more for steering feel when you're flying down the highway than actually affecting the ability to steer at
in a parking lot.
Yeah. So, verify there is no assist. But that pump is whining. It is whining. So I ask him, like, how is this thing to steer with the engine off? And he's like, oh, it's a piece of cake, but he's got it up on the hoist. And so the steering wheel moves fairly easy, but I don't know. Set it down on the ground. You need a breaker bar to turn it. And both lower ball joints, although not loose, I think were just pure rust, like just all rust.
Sure.
And I got enough like Freol in there, at least as a proof of concept, that I got some Freol in there. I think I just ripped the boot out of there. Yeah, I just cut the boots right off the freaking ball joints.
Right.
And soaked them down. And got at least a proof of concept that we put some ball joints in this thing, it'll fix it. So they're binding so bad that it was all the power steering pump system could do to offer some assist to make it remotely drivable.
I'm trying to remember if there was an ASE question on that.
I probably wrote it.
Or another.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. For some reason, it rings a bell on the steering suspension test, but I don't know that for sure. I did run into it one time. I've seen that one time where a steering component was the reason for the the binding or the difficult steering.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the U-joint one's on there. I didn't write it, but I'm pretty sure I remember seeing that on there where it's if it's not on the actual test itself, it's on the app. It might be on the app.
I took the L4 just the other Tuesday morning.
Yeah, what do you think?
I thought it went pretty well. It was 80 questions, and you don't know which ones are scored and which ones are
just the
not.
Ones Perkins wrote. Mine are not. Mine are too expensive. I really pushed hard for our targets to be Domino pizza boxes, but that got shot down.
They didn't like that one.
Evidently, they like Pizza Hut. I don't know.
But yeah, I thought it went pretty well. I mean, considering I'm pretty inexperienced with ADAS, I did some studying and got some advice from some people. I think the biggest thing for half of the test is if you can search and read service info, you're going to do pretty well. And that's what I can say about that test.
And I think I was in the first. I don't think I was in the first one, but I was in the second through. I don't know. There's a fair number of them workshops, And then for a while the timing got horrible, and that's I think when Keith was there.
Okay.
Or he just, so they said I could, if I could had time to hop in, and timing sucked.
Yeah.
Because I really liked being involved in that. But the sheer volume of servants information that was put together, not what you were subjected to.
Okay.
Before it got whittled down, was
Wow.
astronomical. Like, it was going to be a huge issue, and it still is an issue, but I think they solved it pretty well with a kind of a search function.
Yeah.
A navigation function to navigate the service information.
Yeah, I just used Control F.
So
that worked fantastically well for that.
We're going to have big problems because I think the number of pages was significant.
I'll say this, and I was thinking it during the test. If every car I worked on had service info like that composite vehicle, my life would be so goddamn easy, because it's like, I want to know what's on this, or, where's the 5 volts coming from on this circuit, or what systems are involved with this system working correctly. Oh, it's all right here. So you can tell, like, technicians wrote this test or made the composite vehicle. I was like, damn, I wish every car was like this, or every service info was like that. But
it would be cool to write
test.
questions like real world, where somebody's. Yeah. The problem is like, I write the question, and if it makes the exam, I will never. If somebody has a problem with it, I probably don't ever hear about it. But the test managers, they get the phone calls, and it's brutal how badly they get beat up on some stuff. And a lot of times,
I bet
it is not the exam, it's not the question. Mm-hmm. It's the person calling doesn't know as much as they think they do.
Oh, I worked with a guy like that who would, he tried taking a few tests, and it's all he was doing was bitching and complaining how this was inaccurate and this was a bad question and blah, 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 blah. And I don't know. I had taken enough of those tests to know that, outside of a few things, they're all pretty legit. And then you've talked about it. Keith's talked about it. Scott's talked about it. Like, it's so much work just to make one question on those tests. I thought it was very well constructed tests. I did that, and I recerted the L1 at the same time. So, yeah, and I keep on getting those, and I got to recert my L3. I never did the L2. I'm just not a diesel guy. I've never been a diesel guy. And I don't plan on being a diesel guy, so I never got that one, but I'm going to keep all the rest of them up.
I don't know if I consider myself a diesel guy. I don't shy away from them. Maybe I should, but I don't. But I guess I haven't raced to get L2. I probably should just get at least of course, A1 through A9, and then L1 through L4. Probably should just do it for, support of it. And
Well, yeah, you're going to see a bunch of your own questions on there.
Probably not. I don't know. It'll be, I'll get mine wrong. Who wrote this question? I'll be the one calling like, hey, this question's broken. Well, the author seemed to think it was D. Well, that author is a jackass. You're the author. What? That's the best question I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I think there was only one question between those two tests that I thought there was two answers that I could definitely see either one of these, and I just had to give it a 50-50. And I wish I recalled what that test was. It was L1, and it was either a failed module, gosh dang it, or something else. I wish I remembered what it was, but I was like, man, I know that could cause it. I know that could cause it. And I just had to guess. But other than that, I mean, considering there's 130 questions between the two tests, and that was the only one that I had pause on.
Yeah.
You know, there's some that I just didn't know, but that one, like, I knew that stuff, and I'm like, boy, I could see that being an answer and that being an answer. But, you know, when
if there's a way to flag them or at least try to remember the question or the question number, you know, it's question 50, and then they can look up which version of the L1 or whatever exam you're taking and go, okay, this was 50.
I should have done that.
And then they can talk to you about it. And a lot of, like, it may legitimately be broken. It may be a question that's not being scored. You know, so whether you got it right or wrong would not have affected your score, but it's kind of going through that trial, and it's legitimately, you know, it got by the group, it got by the subject matter experts in the workshop. I mean,
yeah,
it
stuff happens. Yep.
You know, or it's one of those situations where it's like, okay, what do you think about this part of the STEM, or, you know, where they're building the information, or this piece of data?
Yeah,
how do you think
something
that
I
affects?
missed.
Right. And then you're kind of like, oh,
yep.
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah. Then that's I wouldn't be surprised at all if that was the case.
I've done it on the app, you know, like just answer a question too quick without looking, and I get it wrong, and then it's like, what do you mean wrong? And then I'll look at it again and be like, I suck. They need to give me that one back. And you wait for the sister and get that one. Sister question.
Yeah. Well, I got to wait until September, I think, for the L4 to see if I passed it or not. But I've a pretty good feeling I did okay.
Well, you're the kind of the bar, so
that's not good.
Wherever you fall, that's kind of where the bar is going to be.
Oh boy.
I think it's kind of like I'm positive Keith has said it. ADOS is not unlike programming, where it's pretty easy until it isn't.
Yep.
And yeah, it's just the calibrations, follow the freaking directions. Like, actually read the directions. Usually no problem. And then if a problem is not working, then, you know, sometimes it can get rough on what's wrong. Like, sometimes you luck out and you look and the radar is not seated properly and it's aimed up at the sky. You know, or they never
modules flip backwards or whatever.
Something right for the blind spots. A lot of times they put the module, which is the radar's in it, they put them in backwards or something like that. And then sometimes it will mess with you, you know, and then depending on, you know, the collision shop being honest with you, you know, where did the blind spots not working or failing a calibration or whatever, or failing on a test drive, like it's not seeing the cars. And where did this thing get hit? Oh, it got hit in the back. What'd you all replace? Oh, we did the bumper skin, we did the, you know, the modules, we did the harness, and, you know, whatever else. And you're like, where'd you get the bumper from? Oh, it's OE. Yeah, and then you find out it's not. Or, you know, they didn't replace the bumper, they fixed it. And they did a marvelous job. It looks beautiful. But guess where they put the
filler?
The filler, yeah. Or I think Mike Reynolds has had a series of at least posts, and most certainly ran into these, where the bumpers might be fine themselves, but the stickers, like the part number stickers, are right in the vicinity of the sensor, the radar.
That's what
and some of them are like reflective.
Yeah, that's what Keith and PJ were telling me, is that those CAPTA or whatever stickers are right in the wrong spot. That's crazy.
I think the first time I saw reference to such an issue I saw or maybe Mike was telling me at Vision, or I ran into him at SEMA too. He might have told me about it at Vision. The more I think about it, I think it was Vision. I think he did his presentation, and Thornton and I were in there shooting the breeze with him. It was just a jacked up it's like, oh.
Yeah. That's crazy. What's the next training event you're going to?
I guess technically Bimmers. I'll be in the AES Wave booth at Bimmers.
Okay.
Beginning of October in Las Vegas, because evidently everything this year is in Las Vegas except ASTE.
Mm-hmm.
They have, I guess Vision's not moving to Vegas, but that's next year. I think Bimmers is the next one. I thought about ASTE. It'd be fun to go, but man, I just got back from Napa Expo in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
Bimmers is at the beginning of October. Apex is at the end of October. I might be going to that. Not sure.
Yeah, you can only do so many of these things.
Yeah, end of September is ASTE. It's a lot of time away from the shop. It's a lot of time away from home. Still got some young kids yet. They can't be left home alone.
Mm-hmm.
Wife works full time. Sorry, I would love to go to all this stuff, but
mm-hmm. Yeah, you gotta pick and choose for sure. I get it.
I heard you're gonna be there, so gotta keep my distance. That restraining order.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Yeah, it should be fun. I'm looking forward to going somewhere. I need to go on an actual vacation at some point. I was thinking about it. I haven't been on an actual vacation, like not work related, since before COVID. I'm like, I should probably do that at some point or another. But yeah, my trips just all end up being like training events or something like that, and that's my time away.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Pedro De La Torre and I were both out at Estes Park in Colorado, I think almost at the same exact time. And I kept trying to meet up with him. He'd say like, oh yeah, we're here. And then I'd go there and they weren't there. And he's like, oh no, we went here. And then I'd go there and he wasn't there. I think just bad timing, maybe.
Maybe.
But that's pretty cool out there. Very,
okay.
Very pretty. If you like mountains.
Yeah, for sure. I've been out to Denver. It's pretty cool there.
Yeah, this is just a little bit west of that, I think. Not very far.
Okay.
We ended up renting a house because that was cheaper than a hotel.
Like an Airbnb thing?
Not technically, but yeah.
Okay.
I think it's more of like a corporation was involved. Like a corporate owned house.
Sure.
So they probably had a few of them, and they're on a ski resort. So a bunch of houses on a ski resort, and of course they had the hotels there too. But we're just outside the Rocky Mountain National Park, and it's just gorgeous. And if you can get away from the light pollution, the stars are pretty bright.
Sure.
Yeah, we don't need the James Webb. We just turn the lights off. You can see a long way. Are you seeing a long ways, or are you seeing a long way back?
Well, yeah. Well, it's entanglement, so you're kind of there, or it's there, and you're there, or I don't know how that all works, but
whatever you look at, you're looking at the history of it.
Oh, sure, yeah. Oh,
so no matter what,
the star's not even there. Sometimes,
very possible there's stars you look up at the sky that are no longer there.
That's pretty crazy.
Burnt out.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah. So when they're talking about looking into, I don't know so much about the birth of the universe is maybe a little optimistic, but they're really looking back in time. and a long ways. Potentially billions of years.
That's just that's crazy that light can just last that long, right? That it outlives its source. That's pretty crazy to think.
It's just particles, man.
Cool. Well, I think that's a great.
You want to go down a rabbit hole,
right? You got 2 more hours,
or a black hole. That'll have to be the subject of another automotive diagnostic podcast.
Oh, I'm down. I'm always interested in that stuff. Who knows if the listeners are, but I find it very interesting. So
you have listeners. I'm.
Well, yeah, it's you and Skundrich. That's it.
Yeah, right.
I get 2 downloads every week.
I have like 3, but one of them's my mom. So
yeah, I was going to say, one time my mom did, but then she didn't listen anymore. I've had some friends be like, oh, you have a podcast. Oh, you should send me the link or whatever. And at first I did. And they're like, oh, I didn't understand any of that. So now when people say, I'm like, you don't want to listen to it.
The ones they always listen to right off the bat is the Metallica one. Like they see that one, they're like, what?
Uh-huh.
So they listen to that. And then I think Carm relaunched the pro wrestling one, so they'll listen to that.
Okay.
And then, if they listen to the divorce one, usually they're calling crying. But yeah, that's about it. They listen to the one that we were talking about with the lightning strike pickup.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Over their heads.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I mean, it'd be the same thing for me listening to
head.
something that I know nothing about. I'm like, oh, okay. But cool, man. I appreciate your time.
Anytime.
Okay, that's going to do it for today's episode. Another big thank you to Matt for coming on my show. And again, if you have not checked out Matt's show, there's a link in the show notes. Do that. Take a listen. He's got some great stuff on there. I listen every Wednesday morning. So before I let you go, last thing I wanted to remind everybody, if you're looking to get your hands on any top-down equipment, scan tools, battery testers, ADAS alignment equipment, thermal imagers, you name it, they got it all. I really focus in on the scan tools a lot because I use them all the time. I actually do use these things. That's why I started being a distributor, so that I could help out the local shops to me. But I've also been helping out a lot of podcast listeners get some of these tools. They're reasonably priced. They are pretty impressive as far as what they can do. But if you got any questions on any of that stuff, I would be happy to answer those for you, let you know what the options are, and we'll get you a deal as a listener of the show. So reach out to me either through Facebook or through the email, which you'll find in the show notes for this episode. But with that all out of the way, let's get out there and start fixing the world one car at a time.